A few months ago, I was reading a population genetics paper and I hit a comparison that made me stop. The genetic distance between the two founding populations of modern Japan measured against the genetic distance between Europeans and East Asians as a whole. I expected the first number to be a fraction of the second, a regional variation, a footnote. It was not a fraction, it was comparable. Two populations inside one country, separated by a genetic gap that spans continents. I sat with that for a while before I kept reading. 3 populations, 1 visual category, same dark hair, same eye shape, same skin tone. Most people, including most East Asians, cannot reliably tell them apart by appearance alone. This is not a stereotype. It is a consistently replicated perceptual fact. Now pull up a genetic map of East Asia. The 3 populations that look most similar sit in 3 measurably different positions, separated by genetic distances greater than those between many European nationalities that look nothing alike. They share a face. They do not share a genome. This is the 35,000-year story of why. 4 things this video will show you. Japan carries a genetic secret. China and Korea do not possess a 35,000-year-old lineage, and a model that just rewrote how many waves built the modern Japanese genome. China contains more internal genetic diversity than all of Europe under a single ethnic label. Korea is neither a bridge nor a midpoint, but a third distinct genetic entity with its own ancient substrate. And beneath all 3, extinct peoples whose DNA still lives inside every Chinese, Japanese, and Korean person alive today, with no name in any living culture and no monument except the genome itself. Approximately 35,000 years ago, people arrived on the Japanese archipelago as part of the first coastal migration out of Africa. Not East Asians in any modern cultural sense. These were the Jōmon, a deeply divergent lineage entering an island chain that had no human inhabitants, carrying a genetic profile unlike anything else in the region. For 35,000 years, they were the only people in Japan. 35,000 years of isolation, genetic drift accumulating in one direction, undiluted, on a chain of islands at the edge of the Pacific. The Jōmon are what geneticists call a basal East Asian lineage, the deepest root of the East Asian family, diverging from mainland populations so early and remaining isolated so long that they carried a genetic echo no continental population had preserved. The DM174Y chromosome haplogroup, the Jōmon paternal signature, appears in Japanese men at meaningful frequency and near 0 frequency in Chinese and Korean men. A living Japanese man's Y-chromosome connects him through an unbroken paternal line to a hunter-gatherer who lived in Japan before agriculture existed anywhere on Earth. Their animistic spirituality, the reverence for nature spirits in every rock, tree, and stream, became the foundation that Shinto was built upon. Japan's national religion carries the worldview of the Jōmon. Hold that thought, because the genetics is about to complicate it. Then the continent arrived, not once, 3 times. And for decades, the science only saw 2 of the waves. The 2021 Cook et al. Study, refined in 2024, changed the entire picture. The first wave, the Yayoi, began around 1000 BCE, Northeast Asian farmers bringing rice agriculture and bronze technology, genetically close to modern Korean and northeastern Chinese populations. The first continental layer pressing against the Jōmon foundation. The second wave, the Kofun, is the one that was missing from every previous model. Between 300 and 700 CE, a massive pulse of East Asian migrants arrived, coinciding precisely with the rise of the Japanese imperial state. Centralized governance, a ruling dynasty, the institutional architecture of empire, all arriving alongside a demographic transformation the previous model hadn't seen. The Kofun migrants carried a genetic signature, close to modern Han Chinese and Korean populations. The continental profile that pulls modern Japanese people toward their neighbors on any genetic map. Here is what the tripartite model says about who a modern mainland Japanese person is. Approximately 13% Jōmon, 16% Yayoi, 71% Kofun. I had to go back and check the paper. Then I read the 2024 refinement. The 13% is not a preliminary finding, it is the number. And once it's settled, everything I thought I understood reorganized around it. The Jōmon, the ancient potters, the forest people, the hunter-gatherers whose worldview became Shinto, are 13% of the modern Japanese genome. Japan's national identity is built on 13% of its own genome. The civilization Japan considers its truest origin was not replaced by one continental wave. It was replaced by two. And the second wave arrived recent enough to coincide with the founding of the Japanese imperial state. The identity is built on the 13%. The people Japan considers its truest founders are the thinnest genetic layer in the modern population. The Ainu of Hokkaido carry 70% or more Jōmon ancestry, the highest of any living population. They look phenotypically distinct from mainland Japanese because they carry far more of the ancient foundation. They are not simply old Japanese. They are the closest living approximation of the deepest root. The people who inhabited Japan for 35,000 years before any continental wave arrived. They have been fighting for indigenous recognition for generations. The genetics confirms that claim in a way no political argument could reach. Here's the question I kept coming back to and still don't have a clean answer to. Does it change anything about Japanese identity if the people Japan considers its true indigenous founders are 13% of the modern genome, and the migrants who actually dominate that genome arrived with the founding of the imperial state? The national religion carries the Jōmon worldview. The genome carries the Kofun. Drop it in the comments. I genuinely want to know, especially if Japan is where you are from. Japan's story is three populations layered on top of each other, the oldest carrying the cultural weight and the newest carrying the genetic majority. China's story is different. One label, more genetic diversity than an entire continent underneath it. Han Chinese is the world's largest single ethnic category, 1.4 billion people under one identity. The assumption built into that label is some degree of genetic coherence, a shared ancestry that justifies the shared name. The assumption is wrong. The genetic gradient from northern to southern China is one of the most dramatic internal divides within any single nation on Earth. The distance between Beijing and Guangzhou, plotted on the same axis as European populations, lands at roughly the same position as northern versus southern European. Two populations sharing a civilization, a writing system, a passport, with a genetic distance comparable to the gap between a Swede and a Greek. Northern Chinese carry higher levels of ancient steppe, Mongolian, and Siberian-related ancestry. Southern Chinese carry higher levels of ancient Southeast Asian ancestry from the Yayoi, Austronesian-related and Tai-Kadai-related peoples whose genetic legacy is embedded in every Cantonese, Fujianese, and Hokkien-speaking population today. The Han identity expanded across 4,000 years, absorbing populations with dramatically different genetic backgrounds. The Bayou southward, Tibetan-related populations westward, steppe populations northward. Each absorbed population contributed its genetics while losing its cultural identity. The cultural unity is real. The genetic uniformity never existed. There is no single Chinese position on any genetic map. Southern Chinese sit closer to Southeast Asian populations than to Japanese or Korean. Northern Chinese sit closer to Korean and Mongolian populations. The word Chinese conceals a genetic range spanning much of the variation across the entire East Asian continent. What I keep returning to is that this diversity was never hidden. It's visible in every regional dialect, every regional cuisine, every distinct physical appearance across the country. The label just made it easy to stop looking. Korea sits geographically between China and Japan. The intuitive assumption that Korean genetics is a midpoint, a blending of its neighbors, is precisely wrong. Korea is not between China and Japan. Korea is a third distinct point, and the thing that makes it distinct goes deeper than either neighbor's story. Korean populations carry a strong signal of ancient Northeast Asian ancestry connecting them to the populations that inhabited the East Asian steppe and forest zones before agriculture transformed the region, a component shared with Mongolian and Siberian populations. This is the deep substrate of Korean genetic identity, older than rice farming, older than bronze, older than anything that would be recognizable as Korean civilization. To understand what this means, you need to understand the Samhan, the confederacies occupying the southern Korean peninsula in the centuries around the Common Era, Mahan, Jinhan, Byeonhan, pre-state polities genetically distinct from both the populations moving into the peninsula from the north and the populations forming across the strait in Japan. Korean archaeogenetics is still an expanding field, but what the ancient DNA record shows points toward a population with its own specific signature, not a transitional form between Chinese and Japanese. A third thing, shaped by its own history on its own peninsula. the ancient steppe-based overlaid with northern agricultural populations arriving during the Bronze Age expansion. That specific combination is what makes Korean populations genetically distinct from both neighbors, not an average of them. And here is the connection that makes Korea essential to understanding Japan. The Yayoi, the first continental wave that began transforming Japan around 1000 BCE, came from populations carrying this same ancient Northeast Asian foundation. The Yayoi were, in a real genetic sense, people from the Korean peninsula crossing the strait. Korea was not sitting between China and Japan. Korea was the origin point of the first demographic wave that began making Japan what it is. Both major continental waves that built the modern Japanese genome, the Yayoi and the Kofun, drew from the same demographic pool that shaped Korea. The genetics of modern Korean and Japanese people converge at the continental source and diverge through the one thing Japan carries that Korea never received: 35,000 years of Jōmon ancestry running underneath everything else, invisible on the surface, present in the genome. The thing that makes Japan genetically Japan is precisely the thing Korea does not have. What struck me when I mapped this out is how thoroughly the Korea as midpoint assumption erases what is genuinely interesting. Korea isn't between two stories. It is a third story assembled from its own ingredients, and simultaneously the origin point of the first wave that began transforming its neighbor. Now the question the entire video has been building toward. If the genomes are this different, if three populations have been accumulating divergence for 35,000 years in measurably different directions, why do they look so similar? The visible features that make East Asian populations look alike were shaped by strong natural selection acting on a remarkably small number of genes. Pigmentation, eye fold structure, hair texture, all controlled by a handful of specific sites. Natural selection can drive convergence in these surface traits across populations with very different underlying genomes, because the same environmental pressures operate on the same small number of visible genes, regardless of what the rest of the genome looks like. Surface trait convergence can happen in as few as 10 to 20,000 years under strong selection pressure. The genetic divergences separating these three populations have been accumulating for 35,000 years or more. The similarity the eye sees is more recent than the difference the genome records. The face tells you what happened in the last 20,000 years. The genome tells you what happened in the last 50,000. The deeper you look, the more different the story becomes. For centuries, people looked at the face and thought they were seeing the whole story. They were right about the surface. They were completely wrong about everything underneath. There is one final layer. Beneath the Jōmon, the Yayoi, the Kofun, the Han expansion, the ancient steppe substrate, the Samhan, all three modern populations carry DNA from peoples who no longer exist as named groups anywhere. No surviving languages, no monuments, no myths that clearly belong to them. Only a genetic signal visible when modern genomes are compared against the ancient DNA archive. The first ghost, ancient North Eurasians, identified entirely through ancient DNA, never observed by any historical civilization. They left no pure-form descendants anywhere. Their signal runs through the steppe ancestry of northern Chinese, through the substrate that grounds Korean genetics, through the deeper layers beneath both Jōmon and Yayoi in Japan. No name in any living language before geneticists gave them one. Their only monument is a DNA signature pointing backward at people who were everywhere and are now present only inside the populations that replaced them. The second ghost is the one I keep returning to, the Yayoi, the indigenous peoples of southern China before Han expansion. They built the wet rice agriculture northern China later adopted. They built the maritime traditions that spread across Southeast Asia. Over 2,000 years they were culturally absorbed, linguistically replaced, demographically overwhelmed. Their languages died. But their DNA did not disappear. Every Cantonese speaker, every Fujianese, every Hokkien-speaking person throughout the global Chinese diaspora carries a substantial Baiyu genetic component, with no name for it, and no cultural memory of the civilization that was replaced to create the one they inherited. The Baiyu built the rice agriculture that feeds China. They built the maritime traditions that connected Southeast Asia. The people who inherited what they built have no story that begins with them. The genetic record knows what the cultural record forgot. The third ghost goes deepest. Population genetics modeling identifies a founding East Asian population predating the divergence of Chinese, Japanese, and Korean lineages, carried by none of the three in pure form, but present in all three as the shared foundation beneath everything that later made them different. The first East Asians, present before the Jōmon isolation, before the Han expansion, before the steppe migrations. A person in Beijing, a person in Tokyo, a person in Seoul, all connect through an unbroken genetic line to the same ancestors who first populated this part of the world. The divergence came later. The mainland Japanese person who carries Jōmon ancestry is living inside a national identity. The shared origin is older. What strikes me, and this is not in any paper I read making this video, is that three populations the world has spent centuries treating as visually interchangeable are each carrying the genetic memory of completely different extinct civilizations. The Cantonese speaker who carries Yayoi ancestry has no cultural memory of what was erased to create the world they were born into, built on people whose closest living descendants were pushed to Hokkaido. The Korean speaker carries the ancient steppe substrate of peoples who left no name civilization, but whose genetic signature persists in the deepest layer of the Korean genome. The genetic record and the cultural record are pointing at different histories, and the genetic record is older. Chinese, Japanese, and Korean people carry the living genetic legacy of peoples with no graves anyone has found, no languages anyone can read, no names anyone remembers. The Baiyu who built southern Chinese civilization before the Han absorbed them. The ancient North Eurasians whose steppe ghost runs through all three. The first East Asians whose ancient profile is the shared foundation beneath everything that diverged. The differences are written in 35,000 years of separate history. The ghosts are written in something older, in the deep human past all three share before the divergence began. They look the same because evolution shaped their surfaces for the same environment. They are genetically different because history took them in different directions. And beneath both the similarity and the difference, the same ancient ghosts. The ghosts didn't disappear. They became the living. The genome keeps going deeper the longer you look. Thanks for watching.